Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. John Wick returns to the big screen, and so we return to talk about it here on Anatomy of Movie. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussion, news, and interviews. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies. And now, here's Popcorn Talk's Anatomy of a Movie.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Anatomy of Movie. As I said, we're talking John Wick, Chapter 2. Might as well be called The Fourth Matrix, because Keanu Reeves and Lawrence Fishburne return to the big screen together. And if you haven't seen the movie, know that things will be spoiled for you, because that's what we do here. We talk about things. Anyway, we have Demetri, Panos.
Hey, movie fans, how are ya?
Excellent.
Phil, what's going on?
Well, John Wick 2.
Chapter 2.
There you go.
John Wick Chapter 2.
And we're going to get Chapter 3, I imagine. Have to.
I think so. Like, it was so blatant at the end. It's going to be John Wick takes on the world, apparently.
Wow.
So it was an interesting movie.
Before we dive into the third one, what were your overall impressions of Chapter 2?
I call this I said this about the first one, but this is John Wick Chapter 2, a.k.a. Anatomy of a Headshot. If you like the first one, I think you're more than likely gonna like the sequel. It's more of the same and more of it. Only one director this go around, but that didn't seem to hinder, having it down didn't have the action. You had from car chases to fist fights to gunfights. I have to say the stunt work in this movie is some of the best that I think we could potentially see all year, as far as practical effects that you'll see in camera. New York gleams as beautifully as ever as in the first one. I think even the trees were glowing in this movie. I mean, they really make, the night shots of New York City are just awesome. Yeah. Especially on a big screen, it looks awesome. So, and while I felt the movie did a good job expanding, let's call it the Wick-averse, I still think it left more questions than answers for us. I wasn't quite, I'm still, and maybe the audience can help me out. Why doesn't everybody buy one of those bulletproof tailored suits?
Because they cost a coin. Same as a cup of coffee, by the way.
I get it, but it seems like everybody has money to burn, or Cougarans, or whatever they are. I don't understand why all these people aren't buying these suits. And if a bad guy is part of the club, are his minions also part of the club? Or are they separate from the club and they're just associated with the bad guy when he walks out of the club? I get it. This is all silly shit. This is the crap that I start thinking about when I'm watching a movie like this. Also, why can a member of the club take out a contract on another member of the club? To me, that seems like it would be counterintuitive to getting new members to join. Join a club where somebody else in the club can take me out. I sort of kind of didn't understand that. So with all that said, I had a good time watching this movie. It was fun. I guess if I was going to really critique this movie, from me, it runs a little long. I'm not entirely sure that John Wick Chapter 2 needed to be 2 hours, because it did seem to get a bit repetitive. And by a bit repetitive, it was 2 shots in the chest, 1 in the head or the face. Yeah. And so I felt sort of kind of that way in the first one too. I'm looking forward to John Wick versus the world. We'll see how that plays out. So that's what I thought. How about you?
I was excited for this movie, and I thought it worked well. And seeing it, I liked the idea that it's called Chapter 2, because it literally picks up where the first one left off. So much like a book, it's literally the next chapter. And then I imagine Chapter 3 will be... I can't imagine the third one not being exactly where this one picked off.
It couldn't be. It couldn't be in 5 years later.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be, but why?
Yeah. It would literally skip over the most interesting stuff. Yeah, and yeah, I like the world that was sort of presented. But I do have that, and I don't think we're the only ones. I've seen a lot of variations of it. That if you start to just pull a little bit at, okay, the world doesn't quite fully make sense. As I joked, you know, a suit that might in the real world cost $10,000 costs a coin, but a cup of coffee costs that same coin. So the currency, I don't understand quite its value. I guess if I was to really quickly answer your question in terms of the club. I think in my mind, I guess it would start with the whole idea of the you know, the oath, and the fact that that Wick needed to go off and do this. Well, therefore he sort of quote unquote you know, he needed to.
I understand. I understand the oath and honoring a debt. I get that part. I didn't question.
But then the reason why he's able to then take it out on John Wick was because John Wick was the one who did this. So then therefore he must be killed.
Yeah, it didn't make sense to me. Like, it didn't make sense. Like, it doesn't make sense as to why the heads of the Continental would allow this. And that character, the guy from Deadwood, Ian McShane, he even told that Italian guy, "Look what you're doing. Like, you're only going to bring wrath upon yourself at some point." Like, he had a conversation with him, but it's like, well, no, like, you should probably stop him from... He did what he was supposed to do to honor his debt. He did what he was asked to do and what he was promised. Everybody seemed to know this. I don't understand why the club continued to allow what that guy ended up doing. My other thing is, too, and maybe somebody can enlighten me on this, too, what is this club? Like, who are these people? Like, are they don't... Yeah, I just don't... Who are they?
It's just, don't think about it. Just the more you think, because I mean, here's the thing. You're trying to think of too many rules. Last time we sort of learned the rule about the Continental. This time we gain knowledge into debt. And maybe in the third one we'll learn what the third rule potentially is. But although we're only told that there's 2 rules. And that's it. So by that definition, yeah, they can kill each other in the club, just not in the Continental, because that's, I guess, a pseudo third rule. Even, well, I guess that's rule number 1. So therefore, yeah, that's it. Yeah, those are the 2 rules.
Okay, interesting.
Anything else doesn't matter.
Get it. It's just again, they expanded because now. The other thing that we did learn is that this appears to at least be. I'm gonna make the leap and say it's worldwide. Mm-hmm. I mean, because a lot of this was a lot of the action took place in Rome.
Yeah,
and there was a Continental there. So I'm gonna figure that there's a Continental in maybe England and China, Japan, all the major cities of the world. There is a safe haven for these people and whatever they do and how they get contracted and whatnot. It's definitely not a Jason Bourne kind of thing, or the Accountant for that matter. But I'm curious just to know about, like, what is this? How does John Wick get involved? And I know that they talked maybe a prequel. Oh, heaven forbid there was probably going to be a television show.
I think it's been announced.
So, you know, it's very interesting. The movie is fun. It's a good, like I said, I didn't have a bad time watching it. It didn't make me angry. Not even close to making me angry. I had a good time. It was 2 hours, you know. I think the other thing that's interesting is, as far as the director goes, he wasn't, there was no, after the first John Wick, they really weren't having any plans. Like, when they wrote it, get Keanu to come in, there wasn't plans to go back to this world again. They more or less thought it as a one-off. And it was after its success, Lionsgate's like, "Hey, you guys want to come back?" And it's like, "Yeah, sure, I'm not doing anything."
Well, in some sense, that's what sort of makes for the best sequels, is when you're not necessarily planning on it, because I think too many people have the intention, you know, this is going to be, and now it's more so, not even trilogies, it's quadrilogies. Well, think about,
No, you're right.
Hunger Games and this and that and so forth. So, the Divergent series,
Right.
right? So I think too many people go in mind. Oh, we're gonna make this into multiple movies. Just go out, make a great
good
movie. If it does well, guess what? Have another one.
Yeah.
And make that one good. And then if it does well again, have a third one.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about John Wick and John Wick Chapter 2 and the genesis of it, I think Lionsgate was hoping for a franchise. But the John Wick played out like movies played out in the 80s, 90s. You wouldn't necessarily announce a sequel. You would, we're getting some answers. I see live chat. I will get to you, Chaos 13212. Just let me finish the thought. So I just think that back in the 80s, 90s, if you remember, sometimes a movie may not have fared greatly at the theaters, but then it found a life on video, on home entertainment, and then on cable, and then people like the first Wayne's World movie finds this, or I'm sorry, Austin Powers is a great example where it really found a life on that secondary market, and they're like, hey, we got something big here, we're going to make a sequel. And John Wick was sort of kind of the same thing. It did modest business, people seemed to like it, but once people started streaming it or on demanding it or getting a Blu-ray or renting it from wherever, then it really built up its momentum, and hence we get Chapter 2. So, and Chaos here saying 13212, thanks for tuning in. But he believes that the club is part of the hotel. That's why John's in trouble. And it's a league, it's a safe haven for assassins. Okay, I guess. But they seem to get orders from, it's just interesting. Cinematic universes now. I don't know. It's Slim 41.
I mean, here's what we can agree on that.
Yeah.
But what we can't agree on is the details under which all of this is run by.
Yeah, because they seem to furnish these assassins. You can get weapons. You can get weapons. You can get bulletproof suits. You can get all the materials that you need from there. So, and yes, DVD sales used to save franchises. And Slim 41 you're absolutely correct. DVDs did used to save franchises, and I think in a sense, with the marketplace being is what it is today, I think in a sense they saved John Wick. Not that John Wick did horribly, but I think that they saw the aftermarket sales and people were liking it even more. Hence, you get a really half-decent box office weekend for the second one because more people got to enjoy it. So,
absolutely. Also, I just find very fascinating that Chad, the director, I joked about the connection between Lawrence Fishburne and Keanu Reeves, obviously between The Matrix, but Chad was actually Keanu's stunt double.
Yes.
And so when we talk about the action, I mean, who better to sort of learn at that point than from the, seeing the Matrix trilogy come to life. And that was all about action, seeing it in camera, not cutting. And I think he's really translated that. And obviously the relationship that he has with Keanu, I think it transpires onto the screen itself. And obviously that's one of the biggest selling points of both movies.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And this movie is a stunt person's haven. And you could tell the opening 10 minutes of this movie is a car chase, which was amazing, by the way. And there is a scene where this car comes barreling out of a garage, John Wick's car, and just lands and turns, and you can tell that was in camera. And it sort of reminded me of the first Jack Reacher movie where he's driving a bullet type car, Steve McQueen car, and that car chase was done practical effects. That one looked very practical, very little CG, and then it turns into a fist fight that goes on for 15 minutes, and you could tell that this is number one, you can tell that Keanu appeared to be doing most of his stunts. I'm sure at some point he had to have had a stand-in, but they really did a good job at showing him doing a lot of the fighting, which was awesome. I think that led to what I found to be fun in this movie, even though at times it did seem to be a little bit choreographed. But even with that said, it's refreshing to see, you know. And coming from a stuntman, you know, who worked with Keanu, there's obviously that trust there. Keanu now is what, 50 plus? He still looks good, and he can still carry himself. Like, and I say this seriously because if you go back to the older Bond movies, particularly like the Roger Moore, I mean, they had that poor guy being in Bond when he was well beyond his 50s, but he was aging. And you know, when you got to A View to a Kill, it was pretty obvious he wasn't doing his own stunts. But here, John Wick, Keanu looks in great shape. He still has the chops. He's doing the fights. You know that he's getting down and dirty and physical. I think that's what makes watching part of the enjoyment of watching this movie.
And I think, you know, for all the glory of the action, John Wick does get beat up quite a bit, and he's like,
Absolutely.
like you could just see in his facial expression, I just want to go home. Just please stop. Like, don't make me have to kill you. But he does.
Yeah. So. I think that's part of the fun. It's like, oh, it's like another. It's like he sees people, and it's almost like his shoulders like shrug, going, "Oh, come on." It's like, all right, settle down. And but I think that's part of the, for lack of better words, charm of, I think, what audiences gravitate to. We are in a very CG world, and even the director admits that he had to rely on some CG here. But we've talked about the practical versus the digital world, and how practical actually now, old is new and old looks refreshing. You know, I talked about that in Ouija, The Origins of Evil, where a lot of it was in-camera effects, and The Conjuring with James Wan do a lot of in-camera effects. I think audiences can suss that out now, and they sort of kind of appreciate it, other than being, you know, barraged with a lot of digital effects. So when you get a movie like a John Wick Chapter 2, it doesn't suck, number one, and it's sort of fun to watch. Yeah. So,
as you said, you know, one of the things that we also talk about is the fact that this is more, it comes down to both shooting and editing, but shooting wise, they up the frame rate, so it looks faster. You know, the action. So let's say it took me like 1 second to walk across a hallway. Now all of a sudden it takes me half a second. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's a very short hallway. Right. But nonetheless, you get the point. And then you couple that with editing, you know, where you're literally cutting like 4 or 5 times within 1 second.
Right.
And so you know, as fun as kinetic as that looks, I'm also like, I have no idea what's going on, so I'm just going to sort of relax and figure out what happened after, because I'm sure they'll recap in some sort of way.
But see, for me though, that was one of the things that I sort of appreciated, is that I didn't find that. I thought they let the fight scenes play out. Like,
you saw it.
Yeah,
you understood what was happening.
You got the geography. You saw, like, they weren't quick cuts. It wasn't like an Olivia Megaton crap guy who does like the Luc Besson Taken 3s of the world, where you'd have no idea what the hell is going on. But here, because he's a stuntman and he wants his stunt people to get appreciated, I guess, and he knows how to do a hand-to-hand fight. And the opening scene was pretty much a demolition derby, says that's the slim gentleman again. He's right, but we get to see it play out with not a lot of edits and cuts. Again, it's something to be appreciated. It's almost an old-style way of making movies, where you're actually able to see people fight things out. Even people like Robert Redford and like a three Days of the Condor. You know, stunts are happen, like, we're not moving the camera. We understand what's going on. So I think that's pretty cool. Keanu was asked an interesting question in a Cinema Blend interview that I found, and he was asked, Was there something that you, speaking of fighting, was there something you needed, something you wanted in this movie in particular? And his answer was actually, it was surprising because as an audience member, when this scene came up, I was just laughing hysterically. And he was like, yeah, he goes, I had to have a fight with a pencil. I had to do a pencil fight. And I thought that scene was brilliant, being that I believe it was mentioned in the first John Wick, and it comes back up again. He goes, oh, did you hear the story about in a bar? He goes, oh yeah, how he killed 3 men with a pencil. And all of a sudden, when he starts dispatching some people with a pencil, I'm going, it's a pencil fight. That was a great fight.
I thought it was actually done extremely well. I applaud them for having the gumption to do so, because it's one of the, whenever you talk about those various stories, an audience's imagination takes it to such a darker level.
Sure.
That then to see it, you run the risk of, oh wait, that's it.
Right.
So, but I think they did a nice balance of, where it was realistic but brutal at the same time, and
right.
I think it's satisfied enough.
I was laughing because I was like, oh my God, we're getting the pencil fight. He's taking people out with a pencil. I thought that was great. I just thought, and it was done really well, and it's a throwback. The last time I can recall anybody getting taken out by a pencil was in the Dark Knight movie with the Joker. Do a magic trick and here.
Want to see the pencil disappear?
It's the last time I saw anybody dispatch anybody with a pencil. Yeah, I just snorted. But it was a really good fight, and I really, I enjoyed watching that. And again, the hand-to-handness of it, the stamina that Keanu goes through, to get that done, and those are the moments that. Yeah, I can bring up all this dopey thing that I'm thinking about, but all in all, a pencil fight will make me forget about most of that stuff.
Well, let's, without unraveling it too much, but let's talk about the main villain, right? Because Wick owes his debt to him.
Santino. D'Antonio.
He wants a seat at the high table. Which almost sounds like it's always funny to me, but it just stems from when you sit at the kids' table and then the grown-up table. So now there's the high table.
But is it it's the high table for the Italian mafia?
No, the worldwide mafia.
The worldwide.
No, because remember they were talking about there's a guy from Asia and they mentioned a couple countries.
Okay.
So I guess the sister was the Italian representative.
Right.
Is what it came. I don't know. That's what I came to understand it as.
He was supposed to get it. He didn't. Wah! I want it. The only way I can do it is I gotta kill my sister.
Yes.
Yeah. But I can't do it myself.
So. She's my sister.
She's my sister. Sure.
So obviously not the nicest guy, but he plays the. I didn't. What sort of lost me was what the repercussions would have meant by him having the high table seat, because they made a lot of that, and that's where because it's not that John Wick wants revenge because he loved the sister that much or anything
right.
like that, which by the way, that would have sufficed in my mind. I think you have to kind of change it up and front load it a little bit to highlight the relationship between the sister.
Agreed.
But it was more so that he poses a threat to New York and various other things, and it just got convoluted.
It was almost a MacGuffin because they seemed to say not only that he would take over, he would take over the Continental, he would be running things at the Continental, which then goes, well, is the Continental run by the mafia? Again, it was just to me it made more questions than answers, and I was trying to figure that out, because why would you want this guy? Okay, so he gets a seat at this high table, but the Continental seems to sort of kind of be outside of that. But it was pretty much said that once he comes in, he's going to be running New York. And that means he's going to be running the Continental as well. So, I don't know. Winston, I think, would have something to say about that. Played by Ian McShane.
I think so, right. Yeah, it's just because the rules are not explicitly stated, it becomes too much of a guessing game.
Right.
And that's why I just default to just make it about the sister.
Yeah.
Because it would have been just fine.
Right.
You know, no, and you could still have the fact that that he puts the bounty on Wick because of the fact he knows that Wick's going to come after him.
Right.
Because of the sister. It works.
Sure. I mean, in very simple terms, too.
Yeah.
Like, that part didn't get overly convoluted, although you'd go, well, that's a dick thing to do. But it didn't get overly convoluted. The other thing that I really appreciated, but again, by expanding the Wickerverse, okay, we were introduced to what could potentially be an even larger faction, yet it's an underground faction, and that's where we meet, that's where we meet our awesome Lawrence Fishburne character.
The king.
The Bowery King, and all the eyes and ears that the Bowery King has, apparently all over the place. And I thought that was an interesting layer to add to this. And in one way, shape, or form, it's going to have to be, it has to be relevant to Chapter 3.
No.
It's going to have to be. Because they're outside of the Continental. They know about the Continental. But for some reason, they're not good enough to be in the Continental. But yet they have their own deadly cabal of homeless people.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I sort of took away from it too, they in a way recreated the Matrix moment, right? Where at the end, when Ian McShane, his character, Winston, when he pauses everybody, it's very much like when they're running through the simulation in the Matrix with Fishburne, and he says, "Stop,
right,
freeze," and everyone freezes. So obviously very cool.
It was a great scene.
However,
funny.
What sort of started to go in my mind was the fact of we have 100 assassins to every one person we got to kill. Why?
Right.
It should be the other way around.
Yeah.
Have one
That's what I can't quite figure out. Like, it just seems everybody's part of this in one way, shape, or form. But it was fun to see Lawrence Fishburne again. It was fun to see he and Keanu together. I enjoyed this new faction literally in the streets of New York, and I wonder if it's just a New York thing, much like, the Continental in the first one, we took it to be just New York until they expanded it. I wonder how far ranging the Bowery King has. They have a Fisher King in England or something like that. I don't know, but I like that layer. And there was sort of the antithesis of they were the exact opposite. They were the mirror image of the Continental. Over, they were street people.
Well, I also enjoyed, 7 million, 7 bullets.
Yeah.
That's all you get.
Yeah.
All right, fine. So I definitely enjoyed it. There was what I appreciated about it was its humor mixed into all of this. Just the fact of, at the Continental in Rome, just the only question being, not the Pope, right?
Right.
And then everything is okay. That's the only thing that you can't do that.
Yeah. That was a funny scene. So I want to talk about Stileski's, we talked about this guy. And number one, he did study martial arts as a child. Mm-hmm. It was, his dad got him into Bruce Lee. He trained in this world-renowned, I know nothing about this, so forgive me, Inosanto Martial Arts Academy in California. He was becoming a competitive kickboxer for a time. A stunt coordinator saw one of his demonstrations and asked him if he'd ever consider stunt double work. From that day, he actually doubled for Brandon Lee in The Crow. Great movie. We know the tragedy that transpired, unfortunately, over there. But then he worked later on with Lana and Lily Wachowski in the Matrix films, and as Keanu Reeves' stunt double in the first movie. And he was the martial arts stunt coordinator for the sequels. Now, say what you will. Like, The Matrix is a groundbreaking film. And say what you will about the sequels. you can't take away that what the Wachowskis did. Like, it's groundbreaking genre cinema, and each movie upped the ante as far as its stunt work goes. So, and this guy worked in The Expendables, 300, Spider-Man 2. I like the fact that he was able to, as a stunt person, make a leap into being a director. He reminds me again. He reminds me, in a way, of like a Burt Reynolds, because Burt Reynolds was a stunt guy who became an actor, who became a director, and Hal Needham was a stunt guy. He's he's a collaborator with Burt Reynolds in some of Burt Reynolds' best action movies. He was a stunt guy who became a director, and it just seems like if you have a good flair for telling stories, and these are the things you're going to want to do, like this guy could be good for doing a Jack Reacher movie. I mean, for these type of where practical effects are going to be better and cut your budget, like this guy seems, it would seem a right way to go. Hire a guy who has some flair behind the camera, and I think that this guy definitely has that, and he's able to tell a story, and we're able to see, and it's not confusing. I like the way of his progression in becoming a director, and now he's getting offers like crazy, which I think is great.
Yeah, I think sticking to the wheelhouse of action, I think he'll do just fine. And I think for me, right, you talked about the shots and how everything looked. He got paired with a really nice cinematographer, Dan Laustens. Lawson.
Dan Lawson.
The one that stands out for me in terms of what he's done before is Crimson Peak. And a movie like that, if you guys don't, it's all about sort of the Reds, and that's all I'll sort of say. And they had to sort of play with that, and they made it look fantastic.
Yeah,
not the world's greatest movie, but
I'm a huge fan of Crimson Peak. I mean, as far as a romantic horror movie, I think Guillermo hit it right on the head. But you're right, you can't take away from the look of that movie. Yeah. It was stunningly beautiful, from the reds to the black and whites to the shadow. And what he does here, what Lawson does here, is not only does a cinematographer have to pay attention to what's going on in a fight scene and lighting so that the audience can see it, but this movie, a lot of it took place in the Rome caverns. And he utilized darkness and shadow, and we were still able to see. And that's what I really loved about, from New York, which is flashy and beautifully lit. And then when we go to those caverns, the pool in which the sister commits her suicide too, that's another scene where candlelit, and again, the color of red introduced in that. Yet, Dan Lawson did a fantastic job as a cinematographer. Sometimes people don't pay attention to that when it comes to an action movie.
I'll say the only, try recreating that mirror finale. The fact that we spent that much time there, and, I'm sure there had to be some digital work done to get rid of certain things.
There was.
But still, that's a tough feat nonetheless to shoot any time with mirrors.
Yeah, they said they did 39 scenes with reflection. Every scene opens with a reflection, whether it's in a mirror or a puddle. But you're right, and I think that it's funny because when I think of mirror type things, I go back to movies. I'm gonna bring up James Bond again. The Man with the Golden Gun. There's a house of mirrors that Bond has to go through. Again, it's not as big or elaborate as this. Enter the Dragon, the Bruce Lee movie, has a fight scene in which there is, they're going through a house of mirrors. This movie, literally, I believe the set piece of this movie was done it was great. It was fun to see. It was very, very, very well done. And I was going, how are they hiding the cameras? And that had to be digital. Because there are scenes in which that the camera has to be there in reflection somewhere. But again, it was a really cool scene that utilized not only just gunfights, but fist fights. So they were running the whole gamut, and then it seemed as if that scene lasted 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. You know?
Yeah, and it obviously had to be coordinated really well. You know, when you talk about, because you know the visual effects side of it is you got to take out that stuff, and I'm sure they had like green, you know how they dress themselves up in green material. I'm sure they did that. But
yeah.
But nonetheless, in terms of, you know, when you're doing it, you have to understand yourself how it actually works. You know, who's going in where, and you know, it's almost like the maze that you get to see from above, and you're like, oh, this is easy. But when you're actually doing it, it's not. And so I give him a lot of credit because that's the practicality side of that, to make sure everything works.
Oh yeah, absolutely agreed. And then if you want to get into the thematic side of it, you know, in a John Wick Chapter 2, I mean, again, when you're looking at reflection, it's like there are two sides of John Wick, you know. The survival side, the grieving over his wife's side, and then the brutal assassin side. You know, I think that, you know, Stileski going on to that scene. We ended up buying 2 or 3 dozen dance mirrors, movable mirrors on wheels. When we rented our rehearsal space, the stunt team and me, we'd go up there every weekend. We'd move mirrors around and hold mirrors and try to figure out where to hold the guns and all the different gags we can do with it. So, you know, how fun would that, like, that's when you want to be a PA, sort of kind of, and being like an on-set PA. Because if you love movies, you want to be, that would be a cool thing to see. Seeing everybody wheel around these mirrors and then, like, in a sense, choreographing this scene, I think that's pretty cool. I think that's really fun. So
I would love to do it with someone who actually knows how to do it, which it sounds like they do, because if I had to do this myself, I would just, I'd get me a gun. I'd want to shoot myself.
Yeah.
If I had to do this myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, the other sort of thing with Keanu, right? Obviously, he's had training before in terms of the Matrix, as we talked about. But you know, for this one, he returns to training with the Special Forces, and that's why he's very tactical about how he does things, is because he's obviously picked up from them.
Yeah.
So, which actually has been fun. You know, there's you know, I don't know how many people got to do it, but as part of sort of the press tour, they allowed certain press to partake in the training regimens.
Sure. Yeah, there were videos out there too that you can see that are pretty cool that they used. But again, I think it goes to show too, like, Keanu's prep in doing this. There's not a time, and I guess it can go back, you know, as far as The Matrix, and he's done other action movies. Chain Reaction's another action movie he's done. He's done action. He's no stranger to it. But he looks good with a gun. Like, he doesn't look uncomfortable handling a gun. And he definitely, because of perhaps The Matrix, where there was a lot of choreographed fighting scenes, he's very good at that. And you can tell. And I don't disbelieve him when he's doing all that action. And again, I think it's a credit to him and to the director and everybody involved that for the most part, it looks like it's him doing his own stunts. So I think that helps for the realism of the film, even though we know that we're living in a hyper-real Wickiverse, you know?
Absolutely.
So, now, did you know that I have to go back because the mirror scenes were filmed in New Jersey, in a soundstage, and I just love that the action sequences. They started prepping action sequences 3 months before anybody unpacked the camera, which makes sense the way that things were all put out. And I just like it would have been great to see storyboards or pre-viz to see. Okay, this is how we're sort of kind of map this out. Makes sense in a movie like this. Absolutely. They did their homework.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of the things, also story-wise, you know, there's no real replacement, but I'm glad that they didn't touch the dog in any sort of significant way.
Right.
It was a constant. I don't know. Well, I'd be curious to know if those watching thought it was a constant danger coming up, whether the dog would get touched or not. But I'm glad he never did, because that would have been too easy in a way, because it would have tied. Obviously, that's what motivated the first one.
Right.
And I just like the notion that he doesn't have a name.
Right.
Just doesn't have a name. I don't care to give him a name.
Don't have one.
Just boy, come here.
Come here.
And that's it. So I enjoyed that.
Do you wonder if that's so that he doesn't become attached, closely attached, or is he just, I'm not naming him?
I think there's definitely an attachment thing,
Right.
Associated with it. But obviously he does. Yeah, I mean he's. As you said, it's the two sides of John Wick.
Right.
He wants to be out, but at the same time, he just can't help but be good at
Right.
what he does. And so with this, it's like he wants to love the dog, but at the same time, he doesn't want to get attached.
If I get attached, they can use him against me.
Yeah.
So here's something too. When we're talking about Keanu and his training, so the training Keanu, and there's 3.5 months of prep, and they've come up with 30 moves that they love, that they're gonna coordinate out. So each one of those moves, they call it a plug and play. So little bits that are great. There's that transition to another movie that we know we want to be in that movie and no one's done before. So we train Keanu on those, even if we don't know where they're going to go. So they train him to do stuff. And it was sort of kind of like, where do we put that in our movie? Mm-hmm. And that to me is like, it's sort of a interesting way to do. Let's train him to do all this stuff. Let's see what he can do. And we'll figure out where to put that kind of a fight scene in the movie. So.
Well, I think with this movie, it worked out even easier because of the fact, like towards the end when everyone's going after him, I enjoyed the way that was edited, shot, and everything else.
Agreed.
Because if they literally did, okay, we're at the train station, fight, he's outside, fight, but that would have been the boringest thing in the world.
Absolutely.
But the fact that they kind of intercut it,
sure.
Each setting is so vastly different, lit different.
Right.
And I mean, just the fact that she's playing the violin and boom, she takes out a gun.
Right.
So it's strengthened to highlight the fact that everyone's after him at the same time. Because if you just kind of go one by one,
right? Yeah,
you sort of get it, and it's repetitive. But in doing it this way, the danger is ever present, all at the same time, from everybody. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah, no, and it's funny too. So when they're talking about the scene that took place in the museum, you got to come up with a motion path. Like, so Wick's gonna shoot this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. And we do what's called a previs. So they used previs, and we just take a DSLR and shoot it, and we put it in the computer. We cut it, put muzzle flash in it, and then blood splatter. Which I'm sure that's where most of the CG was probably the blood from headshots and whatnot. So we strategically place one of those 30 iconic throws or transitions somewhere in the choreography, and then we string it together with some great gunplay, and that's how we weave together one of those action sequences. Mm-hmm. And now, when you think about it that way, if you go back to see this movie again, you'll go, oh, it looks so fluid. Like, you don't think that they go in haphazardly, but I love this plan of attack, and, when you think about the movie, it works to a plum, let's say.
It does. Anything else about action or cinematography do you want to talk about, or do you want to jump into editing?
Well, we could talk a little bit, when we were talking about digital and what's practical, Selesky, he breaks it down to about a 60-40 split, which I'm actually surprised. It seemed to be even, I was thinking that it might have been a 70-30, maybe 75-25. We did as much as we believe was humanly possible in camera. We used old school tricks of putting people in a spot and moving mirror behind other mirrors to refract that. People hiding under black, like you were saying, the green. As much practical as you could from back in the day when Orson Welles did it in The Lady from Shanghai, which again is another amazing mirror shot. We stole ideas from director Robert Close and Enter the Dragon, all the way up to modern day visual effects from what Zack Snyder did in of all movies, a guilty pleasure for sure, Sucker Punch. But then there was another beautiful, they mentioned, of course, a movie near and dear to my heart, Contact, in which there was some great in-camera things that Robert Zemeckis does in that movie. So I love how he incorporates old and new technique. You know how much I love old cinema, and I love it when somebody is able to incorporate some old style technique. They make it look fresh again. So I do really enjoy that split, that 60-40 split of practical. And it was tough to suss out, you know. And
I couldn't tell.
And when it's digital, though, too, it's erasing things, you know. So there's a difference between using the digital to make Keanu fly through the air or make him do something, you know, making him do something that, like, jump from one thing to another thing to another thing, and you're using digital. But if you're using digital as a tool to correct a scene because, okay, we got to get this out of here, or we do that, I get that. That makes sense in today's modern day world of filmmaking.
Absolutely. What else was I going to say about you know, and one of the things that helps is the movie's very dark. And so we talk a lot about this. It's obviously easier to manipulate visual effects when it's darker because they're less noticeable in that way.
Right.
You know, if everything was in the daylight, that would be a lot harder to differentiate.
Right. Agreed. Agreed. Another thing that Stileski is a big fan of, as am I, big fans of silent movies and silent storytelling. Now, it's very... I noticed this, the opening 10, 15 minutes of this movie, right? Couple of things. A, we know it's John Wick, but we don't see John Wick till about 10 minutes into the fight. Like, we see legs getting into a car. He's always in shadow. But there's this one scene where the car's like careening around in New York Street, and up on a wall is a Buster Keaton movie. Buster Keaton, one of the best. Right up there. I put him right up there with Charlie Chaplin as far as silent film stars, and he did his own stunts as well. Just look at things like young Sherlock or The General. Some great, amazing things from Buster Keaton. The opening of the movie, once you make that correlation, is very choreographed silent film because no one's really talking except when you cut back to Stromae as, like, you know, when he's talking about the boogeyman and Baba Yaga. But that was just such a great scene, and I love the appreciation and the throwback to Buster Keaton. And they said, was it hard to get the rights? They go, nope. All we had to do was just make a call to the estate, and they were more than happy to let us use it, which I think is great. It's a cool scene.
One of the things, I guess, I don't know how burning this question is to audiences, but I figured I'd ask so that way we can pose it to the audience as well, and you and I can answer it.
Sure.
Ruby's character, and
right.
I don't know their actual names in the movie, but Ruby and Common. To me, Ruby dies, Common stays alive. Your opinion?
I'm with you. So Ruby Rose played Ares.
And this is her second movie that we're talking about. Well, we didn't talk about Triple X in depth, but she was in that as well.
Yeah, I thought she was great. No women speak for 40 minutes, apparently, somebody says. So I thought that Ruby Rose in this movie, she had a great presence. And, like, an attractive presence in a way. She was like, you know, an assassin with looks, almost statue model-esque. She was really good. Common, that was really good too. I agree with you. Since he made it a point to tell Common, this isn't an artery. If you pull this out, you're gonna bleed out. And he didn't say the same, or he didn't sign that. I think he killed her. Because there was always the threat, too. She definitely was an assassin, where it appeared that Common seemed to be on, I think you said this earlier, common ground with Wick's character. And I think there was John Wick understood why Common would be going after him. So I think there was a professional courtesy, so to speak, there, and Common will more than likely be in Chapter 3. I'm gonna guess, in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to see if they team up.
Yeah,
something like that.
In Common was Cassian. Cassian, and he was really good too. We also had returns of Lance Reddick as Sharon, the hotel.
The butler. Well,
not butler, but he's at the front desk. He's almost the concierge, but he checks people in. It was really good to see him again. John Leguizamo is back as Aurelio. That scene with the car. He's like, "Can you fix it?" He's like, "Well, you got this. Yeah, you'll get it. You'll get it by Christmas 2023 or something like that." It was good to see him. Almost, you wish that John Wick had a Willem Dafoe type friend that he had in the first John Wick movie. I was hoping that somebody would come by John Wick's side, like Aurelio, to say, "Come on, man, this is bullshit," and maybe try to help him out. Maybe that will happen in the third one. I don't know. But I'm sort of hoping he had somebody. Obviously we know Willem Dafoe's character gets killed in the first John Wick, but I wish he had that friend who sort of kind of had his back.
Well, that's the thing. He's a loner. He's got nobody.
Now he does. That's true.
So he's got a $14 million bounty on his head.
Yeah, that seems to raise with every frame of film that goes by the projector.
That ending to me though, that just got everyone pumped.
Did it? Okay, let's. I guess let's talk about the ending. So you said it got everybody pumped. Like, how so?
Well, because it's and then you're pumped to see the third one. You're like, play the third one next.
Yeah. Yeah, and it hasn't been announced as of yet.
Listen, the movie, we'll talk about the full details, but the fact it opening weekend, it doubled what the first one did.
Sure.
Come on.
Yeah. Again, you'd be silly not to at this point, and I know that Zelensky wants to continue it. Now, hopefully it'll just be the trilogy of films when we get to Chapter 3. And then if it goes on to TV, it goes on to TV, but let it have its life on TV. Let's just not get into the 6, 8, 10 territory for John Wick, because that would be quite repetitive.
Yeah.
So, but it was interesting too. The audience that I saw it with was really into this movie, and when it comes to the end, to me though, it just seemed, how do you get out of that?
Well, that's the question.
How do you, the entire world seems to be after you now. The entire world.
Well, that was, for those of you, and I'm not going to spoil it, but Breaking Bad, in terms of the technique, did a very similar thing where they would ask Vince something like, "Do you know where you're going?" He'd be like, "No, we'd try to write and get ourselves into the biggest hole possible. But then we were like, oh, shit, how do we get out of this?" And that was the exercise. You create the biggest stakes, and then you just have to somehow get out of them.
Yeah, and sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't, especially if you're talking episodic TV, like when you're setting up a season cliffhanger. But, for a movie, I know they'll have more time to suss it out and figure out what he's going to do. I mean, we can talk about the potential, but who listens to us? I mean, I got to figure that the Bowery King's going to factor in one way, shape, or form.
The guy, the homeless guy was part of the last shot. Right. So you can't imagine him not going back to the king and saying, "Hey, here's what's up with Wick."
Right. Everybody's got to know. So it would just be, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to find out where this goes.
I guess so. Let's talk about that, right? We'll sort of switch it up. We'll talk about
Sure.
Well, because, okay, to me, in some sense, that 1 hour is going to be so crucial. I could even see it being the first hour of the movie being literally the first hour of John Wick running away.
Right.
Because if you do it right, it could be the most compelling thing ever.
It's true. It'd be very exciting to see John Wick on the run. And what does he do to prep? Because he knows what's coming out. He knows what's coming.
Yeah.
And again, it's very unlike, and this is the other thing. It's very unlike what happened to Adrian, I believe her last name's Palicki's character in the first John Wick. She killed inside the Continental, and then about 4, 5, 6 assassins follow her out someplace in New York, and they all shoot her down. That was like, I remember the scene. I forget how many men there were. It was 4 to 6. Like, Wick can dispatch 6 men with a pencil. Okay? How does he dispatch the world? And being that he was given this hour, what does he do to prep? We saw him prepping in Rome, where he would put guns and things like that. What does he do?
Well, here's the question. First off, it's a question of, does he prep or does he run? I mean, my first instinct... Yeah, well, again, I think this goes beyond just a territory of New York.
Right.
But nonetheless, you would imagine he knows some deep, dark, secret corner of the world. My first instinct is, get a couple of guns, but then get your ass on a plane that leaves before the hour mark and go to goddamn deserted island number 432 that no one's ever heard of.
I guess, but it seems really interesting because it just, the one thing this movie also does is tell us how big this cabal is. I mean, that scene that you mentioned earlier that takes place in the park where Ian McShane says freeze and they all stopped. That was a lot of people and a lot of different age range, race, creed, male, female, everybody. The only thing I didn't see was a little girl with a red balloon. And you just go,
that would have been funny. What's going on?
And a little dog. You just go, it does. It throws back to that scene in The Matrix, but it also goes, well, how the hell do you escape that? Like, that's how many people are in the park. Like, that's what they have control over. It just, again, what the hell is this organization? And why is everybody in it? It just seems like assassins outweigh common folk. Like, I wouldn't have a chance. You wouldn't have a chance.
Well, let's just hope the bounty's not that big on your head.
Yeah.
That people won't care. So, I'm very interested because, who does he trust ultimately? He can't trust a lot of people.
Right.
I mean, who knows? Maybe Winston actually helps him out because he just likes him from a personal standpoint. Who knows?
Who knows? Now, the other thing, too, Chad Stahelski goes on, since we're talking about this, it was something that I had when he talked about the sequel builds an idea from the first movie, right? And he's breaking this down very much like we talked about. Like you said, it's good that they called it Chapter 2. So the next one's going to be called Chapter 3. Well, Stahelski goes on, he calls it somewhat, you're talking about episodic theory. And he mentions, again, a show that was near and dear to my heart when it was on, like Magnum PI. Says the story is Magnum doing something, bad guys doing something, solves the case by the end of the show. Or nowadays, TV is in its 3 seasons of day to day to day, continuing the story, which he's right. I'm a fan of both ways, depends on the project. This, I see 1, 2, and 3 is part of the same ongoing story. So, as we talked about, this will most likely not take place 5 months later. It'll take place shortly after the scene. And he's going to, granted, 1 and 2 take place within the same week. Number 3 does say maybe a little bit more of a duration for John to get lost in the world and then come back. So it's going to be interesting to see from which time point they pick up. As he's running, or maybe that hour is up and we already see him stressing about where he is. I don't know. It'll be... he also goes on
clock countdown.
Right. Now he also does say they almost have a prequel written, but we'd save that for other aspects of the property. Lionsgate is very interested in doing a John Wick TV show, which you said was just announced. So it's funny that they announced a TV show before they've announced the green light for Chapter 3.
And I don't know if it's official, but
Right.
it's just everywhere I look on IMDb, in parentheses, it has announced.
Right.
So, announced can mean a lot of different things.
Right.
So until it's in the can and on TV with a premiere date,
Right.
I don't go and I don't put my hopes up too much.
Yeah. So music, we could talk a little bit about music and so
Tyler
let's
Bates.
and he says, I love music to the point of ridiculousness, which is great. He goes, that's why we did the club scene in the first one. And number 2, we have a little, he goes, he calls it, I quote, a shitload of classical music that's been electricized a little bit. He goes, like the last scene in the museum is Vivaldi's Four Seasons Summer. He thinks, and that was done through synthesizers and actually done with firearm percussions instead of drums. And we use Haydn, we use Chopin. There's a ton of different classical music in this. And you sort of kind of, like, I'm not big into classical music, but there is some recall going, oh, okay, I'm sort of familiar with what's going on here. The music didn't bother me at all, but he wanted to do like an opera, but not like a Tommy, like rock opera. He wanted to do a gunfight opera, which
it's a new genre for me.
It's a new yeah.
I enjoyed the music quite a bit. I found it fitting of the movie.
Sure.
Not that this is 100%, but like I can imagine myself listening to this outside as well. And the whole movie, right? It's supposed to just sort of pump you up, build you to that last scene.
Sure.
And I think the music does.
It never took away. Now, did you know that Tyler Bates had a cameo?
I didn't know.
In the movie, he has a cameo. Cassandra, the girl doing the opera, the band. He's the guitarist. Mm-hmm. He's the guitarist. So I think that's sort of fun. That's sort of funny that since we're talking about Tyler Bates. I thought the music was fine in this movie. It did what it was supposed to do. It was be a bed to the action, not overtake the action, but help propel the action in a solid way, and not just overpower our stars that we're seeing fight on screen. So I thought that it worked really, really good.
Yeah, and his background, we don't talk about him a lot, but he's done Guardians of the Galaxy. He's working on the second one as we speak, I imagine.
Right.
And he's done movies like Slither, Super. He does a lot of video games as well. So I think, especially with a movie like this, you sort of get, because it is very much like a mix of a video game to being a movie as well.
Sure.
So, and he's also done Halloween, the Rob Zombie one. Don't blame the music necessarily for that. Grindhouse 300. So he's sort of been. He's
been around.
He's been around, and especially it's fitting to when you work with a guy like Rodriguez and Tarantino, and then for 300, that's kind of a stylized version of action as well, in a much different way than John Wick, but he's familiar enough.
Absolutely, he knows his way around, and from horror to action, the genres that he does. He works obviously very well with his director, in getting what they want. So, I appreciate that. Something else that I was reading that you might find interesting. You folks might find interesting. The director was asked any scenes without action that took extra time to get it right in the editing room. And would you have a guess as to what that scene could be? We sort of kind of talked about it. Huh? Non-action.
I imagine. It depends how you define action, because to me, where the Italian sister is killed, that to me,
the Gianna Bath scene. Yeah, and that was they said it was. I really like, and don't think it was the hardest, but I like the Gianna Bath scene just because it was so uncomfortable to try to do it tastefully. And the trick was knowing Keanu is a quality that people like to watch. How do you express? Because, and again, when you think about that scene too, you cut to Keanu, and here's this hard-boiled.
Well, he's in the mirror.
Yeah,
he starts in the mirror, and then we cut to him, which I appreciate.
And
right,
it's a great scene. But we also see that there is a sympathetic side to him, and he's almost like, "What are you doing? Like, why?" You know, and I really appreciate that. And he goes on to say Keanu actually taught them how to workshop and how to really work a scene, meaning for that Gianna scene, Claudia Guarini, the movie-going experience. I've never heard any ill will being said about the guy. I've never met him, but he's more than welcome to come on to this show anytime to talk movies and talk about whatever he wants to talk about. But you're right. When he does a movie like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, it's a funny movie. And so when you look at all the different movies he has been in, what some of his movies have contributed to box office, not all of them have been hits, granted, but still, he's been a contributing factor.
I mean, he's been the Buddha.
Yeah, that's right.
He's been the Buddha.
Yeah. So, can't have, there's, nothing bad to say. I've never been one of those people where I've used Keanu Reeves as a butt in a jokes. He never annoyed me. Should we talk about its reception and let's all that fun stuff?
Let's get into that. So I had mentioned it earlier, but took only 8 days for it to make double what the first John Wick did. Opening weekend alone, you always love the numbers, but estimated was 20 million. It made over 30 million. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
and it came in at number 3.
Yeah, decent week for movies. No,
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Decent week. I mean,
it's
Lego
fantastic.
movie. To have 30 million as a third place isn't that bad.
It was a fantastic week. It's been a fantastic. We've had some. Between Split doing the business that it's done, between 50 Shades of Plaid or whatever, 50 Shades of Gray or darker or whatever, doing the business that it did. Then, of course, the Lego Batman movie, shredding up some box office. And then you have John Wick Chapter 2 doing 30 million. It's really astonishing when you think about how many pieces of the pie are out there and what they're taking from. So, yeah, the mere fact that John Wick was able to pull in 30 plus million dollars, and thus far, I believe it's brought in as of February 16th, it's done 42 plus million dollars. Not too shabby at all. With a production budget of, I got an estimate of about 40 million plus.
Yeah, that's
and so you got to figure it's about anywhere between 70 and 80 million for all in hard drives, advertising, publicity. So that so they're on their way internationally. I believe we've got there's a good international contingent on this movie. Foreign took in 21.3% of the gross.
I mean, here's what's great about international. Number one, there's so little dialogue. Number two, when there is, it's all in subtitles. So just change the subtitles and you're in.
But you got to think too that internationally he's a star too because of The Matrix. The Matrix blew him up worldwide. So that's where he can come in internationally. So I mean, worldwide the movie's made over $53 million. Okay. Add to that, you get a Rotten Tomatoes score of 90%, which is
unheard of for this type of movie.
For a sequel to an action movie. It's hard to do, and you're right. It's very rare that you're getting 90%. And I believe
just look up Jack Reacher too. What that got?
Sure.
So,
but its cinema score I believe was an A-, meaning the audiences liked it. The audience I saw it with loved it.
I got an A+ from your audience.
Yeah, oh my God, it was a great audience to see that movie with. How about you?
Yeah, the audience I saw with, this was, I think, random time in the middle of the week, but fairly full, and enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think I saw it on like Sunday or could have, like, Sunday or Saturday. Like, it was like a matinee show, but it was crowded. And the audience really, they ate it up. They really liked it a lot. And again, I did see it on a premium large format. I saw it in the Cinemark XD, so it looked fantastic. It sounded, bullets were whizzing over my head. I mean, it sounded great. This is part of why I'm such a proponent of the movie-going experience. I can't get this at my house. I have a TV that's a little bit bigger than this monitor right here. I have a really decent sound system, but to see it play out and listen to this 11 million speaker sound system, it's great. And the audience cheering and clapping, when he's killing people with a pencil. It's fun. That's why I love going to movies. It brings you into, it just takes you 2 hours of good entertainment. And it gets you out of the house. So
There you go.
so there you
necessary.
go. Yeah.
So there you have it. We already talked sequel and everything else. So unless there's anything to add, I think just recommend it.
Yeah.
Recommend
Well, it seems like everybody's recommending it. It seemed that the audience, when we had online, they were really into this as well. Yeah. I think it's going to be an interesting weekend. We have some more action movies, and we have some comedy. We have Fist Fight. We've got that Great Wall. The Lego movie's still out there doing business. This movie's going to still be doing business. I suspect that 50 Shades Darker or Gray or whatever the hell, I have a feeling that might fall off a cliff, because they already had their weekend and they had Valentine's Day, and now the guy that was dragged to 50 Shades is gonna go, you're coming to John Wick Chapter 2 with me this weekend. So it's gonna be interesting to see how things fall out.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of which, we'll be doing a Fist Fight as well as the Great Wall next week, so definitely check back in for that. As always, we've done over 320 episodes of Anatomy of Movies, so plenty of movies for you to go back to. I don't think I was part of the panel, or maybe I just don't remember, but we did do John Wick.
We did. I thought you were.
I don't know. I can't remember what I had for breakfast. So.
Yeah, I didn't have any. I'm starving.
So there you have it. Thank you guys for joining us. As we posed a lot of questions, the biggest one, as we didn't go into the world too much because I felt it would have unraveled too many things, and I didn't want to spoil, for me, what was a fun movie by going down a rabbit hole that we just couldn't get out of.
Absolutely.
But that's what the comment section's for. We'll be happy to go with you down the rabbit hole there. In the meantime, at DMovies1701.
Yeah, get me over 10 supporters on Twitter, please. And
I think people just desperately don't want to do it. Like, every time you put it out there now, they're like, I won't.
I drop.
It's like a challenge.
It goes by. Yeah, I get silly robot follower things like, what the hell is this Floorshine Wax following me for?
Listen, people love interacting with you in the comments section, for better or worse. For better or worse, they love interacting with you there. At the Popcorn Talk here. I'm going to be launching a new website for me where you can get all the stuff that I do. philsvitek.com. See how simple that is?
I like that.
So I'm building that out.
Simplicity works.
Thank you guys for joining us. We'll be doing Lego Batman movie later today, so check back in if you've seen that. And as mentioned, Fist Fight and Great Wall.
Yeah, we got Beauty and the Beast. March is going to be a big month.
This is going to be so much fun. We're having so much fun. Bye for now.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the rest of the Anatomy of a Movie staff, we would like to thank you for listening and subscribing to the show. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email or tweet us. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been Anatomy of a Movie.